Good afternoon. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ceasefire, getting Baltimore drug dealers out of the game. My name is Mindy Levin, and I'm the director of the Student Outreach Resource Center, otherwise known as SOURCE. This presentation this afternoon is a part of National Volunteer Week, a celebration that SOURCE has put on. For those of you that are not familiar with SOURCE, we are the Tri-School Community Service and Volunteerism Center that serves the schools of medicine, nursing, and public health here at Johns Hopkins. What we do is collaborate with over 90 community-based organizations throughout Baltimore. We work to connect our students, faculty, and staff to our local community. Throughout this week, National Volunteer Week, SOURCE has hosted a number of programs and events, including our Tri-School Day of Service. Even though it was a rainy day last Saturday, over 150 students from our schools volunteered their time to support the work of local nonprofits here in Baltimore. Additionally, several of our outstanding deans and faculty volunteered their time to serve as group leaders. SOURCE staff and our National Volunteer Week Planning Committee members, Lainey Rutkow from the School of Public Health, April Puscavage from Public Health and Medicine, and Kim Aoki from the School of Nursing, have worked hard to plan all of these events for you, and we are honored to bring Dan Rodricks to our campus. If you are not familiar with Dan Rodricks' column, you will certainly be impressed by the impact that he has had on our local community. The National Volunteer Week Planning Committee has invited Mr. Rodricks to speak here today with all of you to inspire each of you. When you hear his story and the stories of those that he assists, you will see exactly what one person can do. The power of one is incredible, and we urge each of you to make a contribution in your own unique way to make a difference here in Baltimore. And that is exactly what SOURCE is all about. We are here as a resource for our students, faculty, and staff to connect to Baltimore-based organizations. For more information on SOURCE, you can take a look at our website or contact our center directly. You can view our online directory of community-based organizations to take a look at all the wonderful organizations that we collaborate with and that welcome the involvement of our students, faculty, and staff. Additionally, we will not be hosting a reception following this event because today is Dining Out for Life, a fundraiser for Movable Feast. Movable Feast is an organization that supports individuals living with life-threatening illnesses such as HIV/AIDS. Rodricks himself has referred multiple people to Movable Feast for their culinary arts and life skills training program. We encourage each of you to dine out tonight to support this worthy cause. There are hundreds of restaurants that are participating, and you can search by neighborhood or by cuisine, and at least 20% of your bill will go to support Movable Feast. Rodricks puts out a lot of referrals to ex-offenders and to drug addicts. Many of those organizations where he's referring people to are also a part of SOURCE's network of organizations. Some of them include Movable Feast, People Encouraging People, St. Francis Academy, the Caroline Center, Hero, and there are many others. So we do encourage you to check out our directory of organizations. Now, let's get to the man that you've all come here to see tonight, Mr. Dan Rodricks. Dan Rodricks has been a columnist for the Baltimore Sun since 1979. Over a 25-year period, his column garnered several regional journalism awards as well as 4 national ones, including the 2001 Headliner Award for column writing and the 1983 Haywood Braun Award from the Newspaper Guild, which cited him for newspaper writing that championed the underdog. Dan's column has been cited in regional journalism competitions as the best local column in Maryland, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. In recent years, the writers and editors of City Paper and the Baltimore Magazine have cited Dan's column consistently as Baltimore's best. 3 times in recent years, including 2002, his columns were named Best in Show in the annual competition of the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Press Association. Dan is married and has 2 children. He grew up in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, and has lived in the Cedar Croft section of Baltimore since 1987. And of important note, since it is National Volunteer Week, Dan has served as a volunteer at Our Daily Bread, one of our local soup kitchens, and he has also served as a board member and president of Baltimore Youth Hockey. To bring all of you up to speed on Rodricks' column, which has attracted media attention locally and nationally, we're going to take a quick look at a clip from the CBS Evening News featuring Dan Rodricks.
Police work can only go so far in battling drug smuggling and the deadly violence that often goes along with drug dealing, particularly in America's cities. In one city, there's a man on a mission to stop drug violence by issuing a public appeal and offering dealers a deal. Here's Wyatt Andrews with tonight's Eye on America.
On the violent streets of inner-city Baltimore, the drug trade makes murder seem routine. But when 4 people were shot dead on one day in June, that's the day Dan Rodricks says he snapped.
I'm going to write a letter to drug dealers, and I want you guys to listen to me and stop.
It wasn't just a letter. Rodricks, a popular columnist for the Baltimore Sun, asked the city's drug dealers in print to just stop killing. Then he also wrote that if they did, he would find them a job.
What happened? Did they call? Yeah, they called. The first day, it went kind of off the charts.
Almost 30 drug dealers have called to ask Rodricks for help leaving the streets.
I've been shot 9 times. I've been through everything that you could possibly ever imagine.
One of the dealers who responded is ex-convict Harry Calloway. Calloway, who has agreed to start job training as a cook, was more than willing to trade in his lucrative drug life for simple labor.
I'm tired of the stuff that I've done. I'm tired of making excuses because our community is in a state of emergency.
Another dealer, a heroin addict we agreed not to identify, asked Dan Rodricks to get him into treatment. As we taped this interview, the treatment center called to admit him.
Thank you very much. You just don't know.
Why did it take a newspaper columnist to get you to make this call?
When I saw that opportunity, yeah, I had to grab it.
No one that we spoke to thinks that a newspaper series and some reformed drug dealers solves the problem of violence here in Baltimore. But it is a spark of hope in a city short on answers.
Can you just stop? Can there be a ceasefire? Can you...
Roderick, who drove us through some of the toughest areas, is more surprised than anyone that all he had to do was ask.
I said it was ridiculous. Hey, drug dealers, stop killing each other.
All right,
right?
Yes, right.
Well, why not say it? Nobody ever says it. Drug dealers of Baltimore, please stop.
So now he spends part of his day making connections.
If I find some guys who are looking for work, I can call you.
Between employers and the dealers.
I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I think that's my job here.
But he's still stunned by what he's begun.
This is how we peel a clove of garlic.
At the Movable Feast, the charity that's training Harry Calloway, 6 of the 10 students in this cooking class are here because of Dan Rodricks. In Baltimore, Wyatt Andrews for Eye on America.
And it doesn't affect your work.
Angels in America. Still to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome to the stage Mr. Dan Rodricks.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I didn't write the Angels in America line, okay? I thought that was a bit much. This has all been a bit much for me. My older brother, Joe, is he has all those degrees in my family. He's got the BA and the MA and the PhD, and he's a biologist, chemist, toxicologist. He's published 6 books, and he gets to lecture here all the time, actually. So I should have called him and said, "You come listen to me for a change." So I didn't get to do that. I should have thought of that. Is there a tape of this I could show him with the Bloomberg thing in the front there? I think that'd be pretty cool. Hey, Ma, guess where I was today? Anyway, thanks for having me here. I appreciate you coming to listen to what I have to say. And it's I've had kind of a remarkable year that I never expected to have. So I guess it gives me an opportunity to reflect on it a little bit and kind of explain myself. So I'll speak for a little while, and then you can ask me some questions. As Mindy said, I've written a column here in Baltimore a long time. They gave me a column when I was 24 years old, you know. And I said, "Are you talking to me? You want me to write a column?" You know, I was a newspaper reporter for several years in Baltimore for only 3 of those years, and I worked in even in high school and college as a newspaper on newspapers. And you know, it's a long time to be writing about one city. January 9th, 2006 marked my 27th year as a newspaper columnist in Baltimore. So when we got to June 8th, 2005, I'll take you back to last June 8th, 2005, a Wednesday, because a lot of people have asked me, you know, what happened that day? Why did you launch into this? On that day, a Wednesday, I was scheduled to write another column. I had written about 150 columns a year for 26 years, and countless other feature stories and news stories, book reviews, sports stories about the Orioles and the Colts and the Ravens, horse racing in Maryland. So by June 8th, 2005, I had written probably something around 4,000 columns, we figured, about what might generally be described as urban problems. I've written a lot of those. I've written about homelessness, the deaths of children in row house fires, homicides related to drug dealing, the number of drug addicts in our city and what's being done to help them, the lack of funding for drug treatment. I have written on this subject a great deal. The city's nation-leading loss of population through the 1990s, the need for housing for the poor, the need for stronger, smarter leadership in city government. I'd written on all those topics. By June 8th, I and the other Baltimoreans had experienced 5 years of relative optimism and good news, a lot of good news about the city. Improvements in student test scores in the public elementary schools, new housing and construction all over town, a leveling off of the city's population decline, the redevelopment of the west side near the restored Hippodrome Theater and University of Maryland Hospital, redevelopment on the east side here near Johns Hopkins Hospital, a promising decrease in the overall crime rate, and for the first time in a decade, an annual homicide rate that was actually below 300. But on June 8th, 2005, as I set about to write yet another newspaper column, as I looked at the Baltimore scene to find a subject, I noted that these stories had occurred. Violent crime in Baltimore had increased in 2004 for the first time since 1999, according to new FBI statistics. Across the country, violent crime had decreased 1.7% from 2003 to 2004, according to the FBI. In Baltimore, violent crime had climbed 4.3%. And ours remained one of the country's deadliest cities. One of the country's deadliest cities. There was one killing for about every 6,500 residents of Chicago, and one killing for about every 14,550 residents in New York. In Baltimore, there was one killing for about every 2,350 residents. And this, mind you, was still an improvement over where we had been under a different mayor and police commissioner all through the 1990s. There were other news items in the Sun that caught my eye. One was about a family tragedy in northwest Baltimore. It was by a fellow Sun writer and reported this. Since January 1st, 2002, 913 people had been killed in Baltimore. 3 of them were Annie Dozier's only sons. And there was this: 2 men died, another was in critical condition, and 3 apparently unrelated shootings reported in a 4-hour period on June 7th. The bloodshed continued last night as a double shooting was reported about 9:30 p.m. Police said 2 unidentified men were shot in the 2700 block of Tivoli Avenue. And all of that combined for me a sort of a perfect storm in my mind. So on June 8th, as I set about to write yet another newspaper column, I was thinking as a journalist and as a citizen, why not just ask them to stop? Why not say what we've wanted to say all along? Will you please stop killing each other and killing your city? I was also feeling like a middle-aged newspaper guy who had been writing a column since he was 24, wondering whether anything I'd ever written had made any difference to anybody. And I offered to help drug dealers find jobs and get off the corners, and I published my phone number, 410-332-6166, and it was that last part that really got me in trouble. So I'm very curious what's going to happen. You know, my editor runs this column, and he says, okay, we'll do it. I had a couple of friends, colleagues at the Sun read it and say, you know, drug dealers don't even read the newspapers, but okay. And one told me that he thought it was grandstanding, and, you know, 4:30 a.m. is the first phone call that came in. I didn't answer the phone. I know this from the voice messaging system at the Sun. 4:30 a.m. was the first phone call from a man who was cutting grass. He had a lawnmower. He was an ex-offender. He wasn't able to support his family cutting grass and weed whacking and wanted some help finding better work. That was the first phone call that came in at 4:30 a.m. And we have a voice messaging system at the Sun that, like many that you're familiar with, but what I've always noted is as the phone calls build during the day, the female voice used to tell you how many messages you have gets more excited. You have 1 new voice message. But then later in the day, it's like, you have 36 voice messages. I think they build that into the system, so I think it's great. It's almost like they hear when she's excited. It means I got a lot of phone calls to return. So seriously, the phone has not stopped ringing at my desk since June 9th, 2005. The Sun outfitted me with a cell phone so I could receive and return phone calls all day, anywhere, anytime. And I don't have a staff tracking my calls and results. I'm not like one of these professors here with the, you know, with the research assistants and the doctorate student. And I don't know. So I have to go with estimates, and I base estimates on some counts I do from now and then with the legal-sized pads that are now stacked up this high with names and phone numbers. And a couple of times during the last few months I've made estimates on the number of contacts I've had with folks in the life, I call it, and that number is at least 1,400 and is pushing toward 1,500. Let me tell you who that is. I'm talking about men and women as young as 18, as old as 60, who have either used or sold heroin or cocaine, or have used and sold those drugs to maintain their habits. They are all in various stages of trouble or recovery. Some are still using drugs, some are in treatment, some are still selling. Many have stopped selling because they fear more incarceration or harm, including death, on the street. Many are older, 28 to 45 years old, in recovery, out of prison within the last 12 to 24 months, unemployed or underemployed, and all complain that their criminal records, in the main nonviolent and limited to narcotics charges, are obstacles to steady jobs. So rather than push dope for $50 a day to support a habit, they said they wanted a real job. They wanted out of the game because they were too old, too burned out for another prison stint, too fearful of the police who have been cracking down on the corners and the competition, too embarrassed to face their families. They wanted economic self-reliance in a way that would not land them in jail or the morgue. Contrary to my impressions and the impressions of a lot of people, far from all of the people in the life want to stay in the life. That's my conclusion after almost a year of talking, having an ongoing conversation with hundreds of people in the life. In one telephone call after another and in-person interviews, I heard from guys looking for a way out. Here's what some of them said. Here are some quotes. People think we sell drugs to just come outside and be tough or hard. We do it to survive. Right now, there isn't much food in my mother's house, if you know what I mean. Another one. I have 4 children. I got to find some way to help with my family. And here's another one from a 26-year-old man who walked into the Sun building to talk to me. It's time for me to step up to the plate and show our young ones that drug dealing ain't cool anymore. And one time before I leave this world, I want to hear my mother say she's proud of me instead of shaking her head and asking why you keep selling that poison to your people. For the first time in my career, I wrote to drug dealers and drug addicts. I wrote to them and not about them. And I think that's what made the difference. People thought I was crazy. People ridiculed me. But overwhelmingly, over the last, how many months has it been? 10 months. The reaction from the readership of The Sun and people who read The Sun online has been very positive. I thought that people were going to think I was, crazy, which is what I heard a lot the first day this happened. But as time went on and more stories appeared, more and more columns appeared in the paper, people were catching on that I was serious about this and I wanted to continue. Should I double click? One more click? Oh, we got some of the headlines here. Here's the thing. People who had felt abandoned, really detached from the mainstream, never really part of the mainstream at all, now had a name and a phone number to call if they wanted some help. People in therapy often hear the phrase, you don't know what you don't know. It turns out a lot of these men and women didn't know what they didn't know about what's available for them in terms of help. All I did was what I do, which is provide information. And I connected people to the information they needed to get on track for something better. I think I built a bridge between one Baltimore and the other Baltimore, that other Baltimore of drugs, crime, high rates of unemployment, high rates of family dysfunction, low expectations, in a way that had not been tried in the media, at least in this city that I know of before. Harry Calloway has graduated from the Movable Feast program. He works in a lawyer's office preparing documents for property transaction closings, right? So that's great, Harry. He calls me now and then. He hasn't done anything with his cooking skills yet, but he felt, I'm going to go through that. That was a positive thing for him. He has that to fall back on, see? He likes the job he has. He takes classes at Sojourner Douglas College again. The unidentified drug addict in the CBS report, I wrote a column about him. He got into treatment. He got a phone call through me. Somebody called me who had gone to school with this guy. This fellow had been at one of Baltimore's top independent high schools, private school, Friends School in North Baltimore. He had graduated from there and got on the track into drugs while he was in college and never got off it until this past summer when a classmate of his from Friends contacted me, says, get me in touch with this guy. And this person who called me has a property management company, and that's what this person does now. Every day, he gets out of his house and he goes to work on the west side of town, on the southwest side of town in the old Montgomery Ward building, and into an office and works on real estate documents and leases and things like that. And last time I heard from him, about 3 weeks ago, he was still doing okay. It occurred to me that a newspaper can and should be, and has been historically, at the pricking point of social change. We should bring, where possible within professional boundaries, advocacy and activism to our work. And it's not always enough to point out problems and call for other institutions, government and private industry, the nonprofits, our educational institutions, to address them. I don't have exact numbers, like I said before. I haven't had a chance to do any formal tracking of all the people I've called and given referrals to. But many, and I think it may be somewhere between 150 or 200 or more ex-offenders who called, found jobs with private businesses. About 50 others found work through the Goodwill Industries of the Chesapeake program, which is one of the few programs set up just to work with ex-offenders. See, it's one thing to ask for these guys to stop killing, stop selling drugs. What you find out in quick fashion is that most of them have criminal records already. The reason they go back to the street is, one of the reasons they go back to the street is because they don't know anything else. They get out of prison in Hagerstown, they release you at Hagerstown they give you $40 and leave you at the bus stop. We don't do much in terms of preparing these men for return to society, to something that won't lead to them breaking the law. More than 100 that I know of entered the Goodwill training program, and I've referred dozens and dozens of others to jobs in 2 other Baltimore programs aimed at helping the ex-offender. Guys now call me to tell me about job leads for other guys. It's kind of cool. We've compiled a list of a 10-page list of job leads, companies that we know will consider hiring ex-offenders, and we mail that out every day. We mail out several of them every day. I do have a college intern working with me now, helping me with that. The typical call is one that came from Eric Brooks, 30 years old, living with his grandmother in a northeast Baltimore apartment building where he's been told he cannot stay without paying additional rent. He has no money for additional rent. He has no job. He came out of prison just a few weeks ago, determined, it's about 2 months ago now, determined to get away from friends with whom he had lived in the drug life, but he had no direction, no job leads, no prospects, no help, and that man was at high risk of joining the ranks of the recidivists in our midst. Very high risk. But he's actually beating the odds. He found a job in a restaurant and he's living with his girlfriend. He called me to ask for help with a second job so he can get more hours and make more money. I have heard from mostly men, but also from women. One of them, a 26-year-old woman named Monique, claimed to have made $1,000 weekly selling cocaine before going to jail for 5 months for doing that. She wanted help finding legitimate work because she didn't want to repeat the cycle of getting an apartment, living with her children, going to jail, losing the apartment, having the children go into foster care. Most of the women I've talked to still need drug treatment. There's a little bit of a difference in the phone calls in terms of men and women. Most of the men who call me are looking for work. They are still dealing drugs or former drug dealers who were smart enough never to get hooked, or whatever the reason, never get hooked on the drugs that they sell. Among women, most of the women calling are still asking for drug treatment help and haven't got to the stage where they can handle a full-time job because they're still dealing with their addiction. And this gets us to a huge problem. The wait for inpatient treatment, my eyes were open to this. The wait for inpatient treatment for the underinsured or the uninsured in Baltimore. We have increased funding for people in that category over the last 5 to 6 years, but it's still not enough. One woman said that when she called an agency for help, she was told to keep calling back until there was an open bed. And I said, well, you mean they don't put you on a waiting list? And she said, no, there's no waiting list. You have to keep calling back. You have to keep proving to the main agency responsible for this that you want treatment. And, you know, the thing that I wish maybe if I had planned things out a little bit better, I would have called Baltimore Substance Abuse Systems or one of these agencies and said, look, tomorrow I'm going to publish my phone number in the newspaper, and there might be people calling me who want some help. So maybe we should hook up so that when they call me, that I get them to call you, and the window's open, and the drug addict reaches out for help, and you grab them, and you pull them out. And it didn't quite happen that way because there aren't enough treatment slots. Even if I had wanted it to happen that way, they wouldn't have had a place to put all these folks. And while they're incarcerated, while they're in prison, they don't get the help with their drug addiction either. You know, you ever thought about this before? You know, all right, somebody's dealing dope and he's using, which is typical in Baltimore, someone who sells and also uses. They get arrested, a judge sentences them to, say, 3 years, Maryland House of Correction or Hagerstown, someplace like that. And you figure they go in there, well, they're gonna get cold turkey, right? They're not gonna be able to get drugs in prison. Well, that's not true, number one. And even if it was true, even if they couldn't access heroin or cocaine while they were in prison, they're still not dealing with their addiction. So when they come out of prison, they party, they relapse, they go right back to it. It happens, I don't know, can't give you statistics. It happens a lot. It is a complex problems. These are complex problems. We tried to arrest our way out of the heroin and cocaine epidemic for more than 20 years. We filled the old prisons, built new prisons, and filled those. We took corrections out of corrections, warehoused inmates, and only recognized the need for public funding for drug treatment in recent years. We sent thousands upon thousands of men and women home from prison vulnerable to relapse and unprepared for straight time. And we continue to make it difficult for even nonviolent offenders to find jobs, and we have a recidivism rate in Maryland of more than 50%, which is slightly below the national average. Any citizen, Republican or Democrat or Green, black or white, should see the need for a major repair here. The problem is there isn't a lot of public leadership on it. There aren't politicians pointing to this and saying, this is a costly problem that we can fix. We know how to fix it. So I wrote that column last June 9th because I was sick of all this, sick of the waste of human life, sick of the cycle, sick of drug addicts breaking into our cars and houses, shoplifting in our stores, prostituting themselves, neglecting their children, sick of paying as a taxpayer in Maryland between $24,000 and $25,000 a year per inmate annually. Yeah, that's what I mean by each year. Only to have half of them return to prison within 3 years of release. Every year in the state of Maryland, between 13,000 and 15,000 inmates are released from our prisons. Anywhere from 9,000 to 12,000 of them return to Baltimore City zip codes. Of those, 50% commit a crime within 3 years, serious enough that they return to the Department of Corrections. What we need is drug treatment on demand. We need to change profoundly the corrections system and make it from start to finish comprehensively rehabilitative. We need public leadership on the cause of the ex-offender, taken directly and loudly and clearly to the business community, in particular, a stated official belief in the concept of redemption and second chances. For whatever argument you give, altruistic or economic, there's an argument to be made here. This is something that can be fixed. We need a sustained effort to build better communities by breaking the drug-fueled cycle of crime, incarceration, unemployment, crime. It's one of the great and exciting challenges in our midst. I knew it was there all along, and I just kind of stumbled into it again, and it's kind of revived my interest in being a newspaper guy again. And I see a problem that was really in our city was a sleeping giant of a problem. I know we have to focus on the future, on children. I know that's very important, but this adult population I'm talking about is going to be around for a long time. They're in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and they need to be fixed too so they can take care of those children. And I keep thinking what a better world this will be, a better state, a better city, if one half of Baltimore steps up and helps that other half, that other Baltimore we talk about. And it might be, we might be the greatest city in America instead of the greatest half city in America. So that's kind of my spiel on where we are as of today. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Can I take some questions?
So we are certainly ready to take some questions. Lainey's on the side. She has a microphone, so if you want to raise your hand, we will pass down a microphone so everyone can hear your wonderful questions.
Please, anything you'd like to ask.
Hi, Dan. My name is Betty Addison. I'm Director of Career Services here for the school. You talked about the things that you've already done. Did you get any help from city or state officials in terms of funding to help in the process that you're doing? And secondly, what are your next steps? What do you plan to do next now that you've gotten these ads out?
Yeah. Actually, I had very little contact with the city government. And I didn't go really looking for it. I will say that Baltimore City does have the Mayor's Office of Employment Development, which has a whole program run by a man named Felix Mata, M-A-T-A, devoted to the ex-offender issue, and is very good. It's very good. There's a lot of information there. It's one of the places I refer people to because they know companies that are willing to hire ex-offenders, that have an open mind about it, and it's a great resource for ex-offenders. So that is in place there. I had a conversation with the mayor of Baltimore about this, and he didn't seem at all interested in what I've been doing. And I don't push it. I just do my thing, and I don't care. I will say, on the state level, I was surprised by this, that the Secretary of Public Safety in Maryland, Mary Ann Sarr, I always knew as a very tough prosecutor and state official, worked for 2 or 3 governors, and I remember her, she's famously remembered in Baltimore for having pulled a gun. I'm sorry, did she grab the guy's gun? She was robbed on the street of Baltimore, and I think she grabbed the guy's gun and shot a guy, or shot at him or something. They called her Annie Oakley for a little while. Tough, smart cookie, right? Well, she's in there. After 20 years of building Supermax, which you can go over and see someday, it's over in the Gulch there behind the Baltimore Sun, where we have all the prisons, Prison Gulch we call it. After building all these prisons and filling them all up, she's talking about reducing population. She's talking about doing something about recidivism here. She's talking about this comprehensive rehabilitative effort about reforming corrections, about changing the whole culture of corrections, and she has the governor's support. So that surprised me. That effort is minuscule, though, and it's caught up in partisan politics in Maryland, and it's really a shame. I think it's because we have a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, and because if a Democratic governor had proposed the things that Ehrlich has proposed in this regard, I think they would all have been accepted by now. Because, when you talk to people about this, you really don't get a counter-argument. Most people say, well, criminals got to be punished. Yes, no doubt about it. But you have a very large population that is nonviolent, that is repeating crimes because of addiction or because they're selling drugs, okay? If you just dealt with that population alone, you would make a significant dent in the incarcerated population in Maryland. So that's what their focus is on, and there's no argument. The only arguments I've received against what I'm doing is a moral argument that I've heard, someone quoting the Puritans, saying, when you commit a crime, you get a stigma. You become stigmatized. And this is good for society because it separates the righteous from the vermin among us. That was one thing I got in the email. So it means that forever we're going to punish people forever, basically. You sell cocaine in Baltimore, you get arrested, you go to prison, and then after that you're stigmatized, and we shouldn't give you any second chances. No employer should even look your way, right? But that's a kind of ridiculous argument. That's the only kind of argument I've received counter to what I'm suggesting here, which is that we open our eyes a little bit to this population that keeps coming out of prison, going back into prison. Why do they keep doing that? Why do they keep repeating that behavior? It's because while they're in prison, they're warehoused. They get very little services, very, very little education. It's very limited. What Mary Ann Sarr has proposed in Maryland is she has a new program called Restart. It's limited to 3 prisons. There are 30 facilities in Maryland. So, yeah, I mean, I'm talking about this and talking about it, but what we offer in Maryland is very limited. We have not changed the culture of corrections in this state. Some other states have had more luck already, more progressive efforts. Anybody else?
Hello. I'm Leon Purnell from the Men's Center, and I agree with you on a lot of the points you raised. In fact, Commissioner Sarr, we've been working with her for 1.5 years, and we still haven't been able to get that moving, so you're right about that as well. One of the things that's missed so often is that the recidivism rate is there because the men come out of prison with every intention of working, doing the right thing, most of them, not all of them. And they have a 3-month window. If you don't get them in that 3 months, they're going back to what they know best.
That's probably right.
Yeah. One of the problems we have in Maryland and pretty much in the country is that once a person commits a crime, they think he's supposed to pay forever. Even the Constitution say you can't do double jeopardy. You know, you're supposed to do your time, and it should be over with. But they're not given that opportunity to further their lives in a normal fashion, because many people hold that over their heads forever. I just got a fella a job not long ago. The man liked him so much at the thing that he called me and thanked me for sending him. Got a copy of his criminal background record, 14 and a half years old, and let him go.
Yeah. This is no joke. Some people will actually start a job and the background check won't come through for 2 or 3 months.
True in his case.
And they've been an exemplary employee for 2 or 3 months, and then right down wherever they're working that day, a supervisor will come and say, "I'm sorry, we got to let you go. You just got flagged. You had a felony in 2002." You know, and you know it's very tough for these guys, men and women, to apply when they go to apply for a job. How do you answer that question? You know, they don't get a lot of counseling on how to handle that.
Well, we advise them to answer truthfully, but to put a statement in there that we'll explain, because it's necessary that they put the truth on there, because that's the only leg they have to stand on.
Since 9/11, everybody tells me in the security business that the number of background checks, the number of companies contracting for background checks on employees has skyrocketed. And there are many companies now that have an absolute prohibition against anybody who has a criminal conviction against hiring them. In some cases, in Baltimore, you know, people are arrested and never charged. In the month of August 2005, Baltimore City Police made more than 12,000, 13,000 arrests. It was Arrest Fest month. And
bogus charges.
In more than 3,000 cases, the state's attorney's office refused to prosecute. They just dropped the case. Now, those folks were arrested and never charged. In Maryland, that still shows up on your record. And most employers, when presented with a background check on an employee, do not know how to specifically read these things so that they understand, you know, what the outcome, what the resolution of these cases were, and wouldn't recognize a null pros from a conviction.
Or a stat. That means nothing.
Yeah, it's very complicated. It causes a lot of problems for people. Yeah. There are one company I ran into fully prepared for this problem, recognizing this is a property management company, recognizing that they're probably going to encounter people with criminal records and have to consider hiring them. So they went ahead and set up a criteria for who they would hire and who they wouldn't hire, which crimes they would allow, committed when, what the interval was between when the crime was committed and when they were applying for a job. And they have it all set up. So they knew they were going to be asked this question over and over again, so they have it on paper. A lot of companies will hire ex-offenders but don't want anyone to know about it. They do it quietly. They don't want their other workers, other employees to know about it. They don't want their customers to know about it. They don't want in some cases, their shareholders to know about it. But it is a serious problem. Yes, sir.
I thank you for the work you're doing. I'm just curious, it's interesting that you, having done this a long time and having presumably cared about this issue for a long time, turned a small switch and decided to do something different in your approach by writing directly to a group that had been on your mind, but just the idea of doing something new. I'm wondering if you have any advice to us in the School of Public Health about how we can help and how we can think perhaps a little differently about what we do.
Well, I wouldn't assume anything is a lost cause, number one. I think we have a tendency in our society to look at some problems and say, you know, why bother? Some of the chronic problems that we've had, like this one for many years, and say it's a lost cause and you're always going to have drug dealers and drug addicts, and Baltimore's always going to have those awful neighborhoods, and nothing's ever going to change. So, I mean, I actually hear this expressed a lot from very cynical people. And, you know, these are people who are also politically savvy or in touch with our political system, you know, and care about it, but they feel it's a lost cause. So number one, I would say no matter what you're facing, where you decide to put your energy, or either as a professional or as a volunteer, don't consider anything a lost cause. I don't know if that's helpful to you or Pollyanna-ish, but I'll say it. I feel the need to say those things now because I have thought about this, because I had gotten tired of writing about this stuff. My newspaper, for a period of time in the 1990s, early 90s, got institutionally tired of it and actually made a decision, an editorial decision, to not write about crime as much as we write about other things. There's a friend of mine who wrote an essay once called Pepperoni, and he refers to pepperoni journalism, which is something that's come into newspapers in the last 20 to 25 years, and that is consumer kind of journalism. Where's the best pepperoni in town, you know? Where do you go to shop for the best shoes? Where do you go to shop for the best pepperoni? And he says that has infiltrated newspapers, and it's good. I mean, those are our customers are interested in those things, but not at the expense of covering the problems in our society, or really focusing on deep, serious issues. And we get newspapers in particular get accused of being liberal, I think often because we're dealing with problems and exposing things that people really don't want to face sometimes. So, and I would say, you know, one last thing about volunteerism, that it almost isn't enough in your job. I'd like to think that in my job I've been able to help people over the years. You know, I remember writing a few stories over the years where what I wrote changed the outcome of things. That's a great feeling. You know, not everybody's going to have that opportunity. I think it's a great part of my job to be able to say I can do that. You know, but it isn't always the case, especially if I write about pepperoni a lot, right? So I think you got to maybe sometimes just go the extra step, go the extra mile. I'm still answering the phone. I was on the phone today with 3 or 4 of these guys. So, and I think you finished answering your question. I don't see a way to get off this train right now. So unless I stop publishing my newspaper, my phone number in the newspaper. But it's not that hard to do. It's not that hard to connect people to this information. So, anybody else?
Yes. Good evening. My name is Erica Reeves. I'm a graduate student in the School of Medicine. And one of the major issues I see is kind of this battle between written word, the newspaper, Time Magazine, Newsweek, and what we see on TV.
Yeah.
Because I think we're really in a day and age where we rely on the TV for our news. We like the ticker tape at the bottom, quick, short, to the point. If it's not happening in Baltimore, then it's not affecting us. You know, we can dismiss it as it's overseas. We can watch it in the morning, go to work, go to school, knowing where, you know, there's no immediate threat. We can go to sleep at night, there's no immediate threat. But I think one of the major issues is that, and a lot of people say this, like MTV, BET, that our young people are watching, violence, drug dealing, it's glorified. It's quick money, easy money, cars, houses, women, men, whatever your preference.
Yeah.
So where do you see kind of the written word, the newspaper, where I don't know very many people who read a newspaper on a regular basis, but everybody watches the Today Show, everyone watches CNN, headline news. So where do you see kind of the written word battling TV and the other sources of media in terms of addressing the issues of drugs and violence?
Okay. I still believe that newspapers drive the agenda for this country. And the media, what you end up watching on television in terms of news, usually starts off with the enterprise of newspapers somewhere. The major newspapers, the regional newspapers, the local newspapers. The Baltimore Sun, while our circulation has declined, fewer people are actually buying the newspaper than were buying it 10 or 20 years ago. Far more people are reading it online. And among those reading it online are the news assignment editors at TV stations and radio stations in our region, in our city. Newspapers still provide the content, the reporting that's necessary. That's why we need to continue to exist. If we didn't exist, I don't know who would do that. I don't know where that information would come from for social change, or particularly for political change. I don't know where else it would come from. It's not going to come from fantasy television or reality TV. That's not the real world. And eventually, you know, we all have to live in the real world. So, you know, you either accept living in the real world and being a citizen and being active and involved, or you accept the consequences, which is kind of what we have now. You know, $3 for gasoline at the pump, a war in Iraq that I don't bet anybody in this room supports. I don't know if you do or not, but I'm guessing you don't, based on the polls. You know, you end up with the government that you deserve if you don't take part in it. So, you know, it is still, to me, a noble calling to be in journalism, to do it, try to do it right. A lot of times the print guys, men and women in the print journalism, get blamed for stuff that people see on television, you know, some of the sloppiness, and we have our problems too. But I work with a lot of very smart, dedicated, hardworking, quiet, collegial, academic, brainy kind of people, and it's great. And it's a great environment, informed and actively thinking citizens who work in the newspaper I work with, work in. So I think it's always going to come from there. The Baltimore Sun now has on between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. each weekday 360,000 hits on its website. The newspapers in every major city remain the most frequently visited websites in those cities, followed by usually a strong TV station or radio station. So I think the future is going to be still print, but in a different form. Yeah, I hope. Somebody else?
Yes.
Yeah, anybody, please, anything you want to ask?
Hi, how's it going, Mr. Rodricks?
Hi.
Ernest Davis. I'm in organization development and training for the health systems. Okay. My question to you is, I know in the beginning you said you shared just the age brackets, like from 18 to 60 years old. My question to you is that, is there any educational component that you've used as a resource? Because I know myself, I grew up in the inner city, and one thing that I realized is that it was more like drug dealing, as wrong as it is, it was more economic than anything.
Right.
And a lot of time with these programs, they only give you the tools to pretty much be able to get mediocre jobs, which will pretty much keep you in those same neighborhoods. So are there any educational components as far as maybe college or GED programs and things like that, you know, just to give them a different we had a Pell Grant program for the United States prisons that the Congress under Bill Clinton ended. You know, it was a way for guys to get college education while they were in Congress. It amounted to 0.1% of the federal budget for the Pell Grant system. The Pell scholarships, the Pell Grant system. And they did away with it because it got on the talk radio that inmates were getting a college education, and what did you think about that? You know, never looking at the issue, well, what's wrong with that? You know, wait a minute, what's wrong with that? The guy gets a GED, what does he do next, right? So you can't get a GED in prison, and then if you're lucky enough to be in a prison that has it available to you during the time you're in there, right? I refer guys to the GED program. You should hear the way I speak to some of these guys on the phone. It's really good. I can't believe they talk to me. Really, honest to God, really. I mean, why do they call me up, right? This has been the best year of my life. These have been the most meaningful conversations I've ever had with anybody. And I tell them, I feel very at ease talking to them, either in person or on the phone. Like today, it was a guy named Calvin. You know, he said, I need a job. I said, well, Calvin, wait a minute. When did you get out of prison? Like 3 weeks ago, all right? Or what have you done since then? Well, who do you live with? I live with my mother. How old are you? 28. And what kind of job can you do, right? And he's never actually he's never really worked. He's been selling drugs
and in prison most of that time, so like you're talking about, and he didn't finish his high school education, didn't get close to that. So I said, look, you know, you can spend a lot of time going out and trying to find a job and getting turned down left and right because you have felony convictions. You're 28 years old. When someone asks you what was your last job was, you're going to say it was, you know, selling drugs on Holbrook, right? And so I said to him, I said, you got to get into a program. Oh, I don't want a program. I said, I know you don't like that word program. A lot of guys, they don't want to hear about a program. They want a job yesterday, you know? And I said, you can go out and try to find a job on your own and get turned down left and right, or get some $7 an hour job and get frustrated. You're going to be back on the street within 3 months, right? Something like that. So I give it to him pretty hard. I said, I'm not going to help you unless you agree to go down to the Goodwill program or Strive. I sent him to the Strive program in Baltimore, which works with young fathers. He has 2 children he has to pay child support for. So, you know, if he can just do that, then he has a program that stands behind him that helps him find a job, helps him prepare for a job, teaches him how to dress and go to work. These are basic things he doesn't know. Help him get a GED, help him get his identification card, right? All those things he needs. And then he has a program that stands behind him. So when he goes to an employer, he can say to an employer, I went through the Strive program in Baltimore. See, I'm trying to get some help. I'm trying to do the right thing. And his odds, the odds of him finding a job are better. His chances for success are better. So that's the kind of thing I've been doing with them. But the education is a big key, is very limited. Somebody else had a question. You can shout it out unless you need the mic.
Yeah,
you got the mic. All right.
I got the mic. Therefore, I have control.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I know that we don't have in this world, in many ways, is control. And that's what I really want to applaud the fact. My name is Lisa McCall, and I'm actually works for a research study, a director of a research study here at Hopkins that looks at HIV and IV drug users called the ALIVE study. And for a good number of years, that population has come to us for research. You know, we're taking inquiries from them and blood work and that sort of thing. But in between all of that is the fact that they come to us as human beings who are really looking for help.
Right.
And they're very, they've got a lot of drama, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of the drama that builds up in people's lives.
Yeah.
And it's been an extremely, I think it's one of the things that Hopkins may be able to do to reach out to the community is, and I applaud the source, that it is hands-on. It is going into and having, like you did, writing out, reaching out, and saying, "Hi, who are you?" And I'd like to help you.
Right.
It's a see, hear sort of thing. There's a lot of people in this world who are not seen and heard. And the population that you have tapped into are mostly about never having really been seen and heard in their lives.
I think a lot of the guys who call me want to have somebody to talk to who's not from their own realm necessarily.
Right.
They know if they start conversations in their own neighborhood, they're going to end up sucked back into. So that's part of it. I recognize that.
Right. And that's one of the things that has become very rewarding in the position that I have. I'm working with people who come to us like this. And when you have the spark of connection as somebody who's come out of prison or who's from a totally different, you know, socioeconomic background, ethnic background, and I'm sitting there and I'm talking with them in a way that they see something that we can relate.
Right.
And that's the key thing. We all can relate.
Mm-hmm.
We're all human beings. And you have done something to show the fact that you are a human being saying, I want to reach out to other human beings. And be in a place where I can see and hear you, and maybe I can even help you at the same time.
Right.
So it's really wonderful that you've been able to do something like that. And are you still giving your telephone number out so I could help my crowd?
I'll give you the phone number. Yeah. Like women, my phone number. Yeah. Anyway.
No, really, it's not for me.
I think I have a suggestion on how we can fix all this, not all of it, but a big chunk of it, and make this connection you're talking about. It's very simple. One of the most effective, probably the most effective offender reentry program in Maryland is called Reentry Partnership. And it brings together 7 or 8 different agencies, housing, health, drug treatment, education, I get to name a few other services that are offered. It brings together a group of nonprofits. They go into a prison 4 months before the inmates are due to be released. They meet with them. They say, look, you're going to be out in 4 months, or you're going to be out in 6 months. These are the services that are available to you. This man over here, his name is George. He's willing to be your caseworker. So you get a probation officer, but you also get George. George is going to be outside the fence. He's going to meet you when you come out, and he's going to help you find a place to live. He's going to help you find drug treatment, which you probably need because you haven't had any in here, and we're going to finish your education, and we're going to give you a job placement service. This is what REP does, Reentry Partnership, and it works. The success rate is tremendous. It's real close, it's real personal, it's small. The ratio of, of caseworker to inmates is about 1 to 8, 1 to 10, something like that, and they keep it like that. Right now it's limited to 5 zip codes in Baltimore. If you're an inmate in a Maryland prison and you're due to be released within 6 months to one of those zip codes, this service is available to you. It's done on the cheap. It's run by Catholic Charities. It could be a model for the entire system. And I don't know why it's not. I think it's political. Partly it's money. But that could be done. That's a way of making this connection you're talking about with the guys who we're talking about, who are going to be selling drugs within 3 to 6 months of their release unless something like that is done. Or they're going to be returning to other forms of criminality or just not being productive. Yes, sir. Oh, did somebody else have the mic? Oh, I was supposed to call on you first?
I think.
All right. I'll come right there. I'm sorry. I'll make it quick. I give long answers. I'm sorry. I'm trying. I'm really trying. Yeah. All right.
I just have a brief comment. The young lady spoke about how not reaching a target population through the newspaper. Growing up in an economically depressed neighborhood and knowing a lot of people who have been incarcerated for dealing drugs or doing one thing or another in order to get money to help take care of their family, when these young men are incarcerated, they don't look at the computer, they read. So a lot of people think they're stupid, they don't read, they don't pay attention. These young men come back. I can name at least 2 or 3 that I know that are out. They read the paper every day because they've been incarcerated for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It becomes habit. So, and obviously your numbers prove that you writing a column in the paper, not showing something on MTV or BET or even News Fox 45 is not necessary in order to reach a target population.
Right.
These young men are intelligent, they read, they want to take care of their families, but there are not enough programs to help them.
Right. Speaking of intelligence, I have met, I can't tell you how many young men who I just know, if they had gotten on a different track when they were around 16 or 17, as the twig is bent, if they had just gone some other way, they would be selling Jaguars to somebody today. They'd be running small businesses. They would be in middle management. I swear to God, I've met guys, they've told me their whole story about how they sold drugs and, had employees, had a system for paying them, had a system for purchasing, distribution, making deliveries, keeping the police away. It was a whole business plan, and I mean, they'd probably be great in customer relations for somebody. I make a joke, but the personalities that I've met are like that. I met one guy who's been dealing marijuana for 12 or 13 years, and he has a lot of medical marijuana customers who live way out in the suburbs. He makes home deliveries on Fridays, So, and then this thing about reading, this did surprise a lot of people that, drug dealers read the newspaper. That was one of the things that got ridiculed when I first did this. And it turns out if they don't read, their mothers, their sisters, or their brothers read. And I didn't mention that I have the mail I've received from prisons over the last year is really a lot, a lot. And it's not the usual stuff, which is I'm in here and I'm innocent, please help me. It's I'm getting out in a year, I'm getting out in 6 months. Please send me your list of job leads, that kind of stuff. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm a student here and thus part of this institution. And this may seem, I hope this isn't meant to sound like a cheap shot towards the school, but ever since I've been here, I've been surprised, I guess, at how I feel like the school has capitalized on property in this area, and I don't see a lot of activity that the school is giving back towards. I feel like there's this lack of connection, and in fact, I would bet there are not many administrators here today, but none of them have been to local schools, visited to see what's happening. And I don't know what to do about this. We're trying to shake things up here, but we have the source, 2 individuals working at the source for 3 schools. This school of public health is, I think last year the revenue was something like $330 million. And it's just shocking, how little is being done by these institutions. And
have you actually, let me ask you something. Have you actually measured to see, have you actually looked to see what the institution's doing?
Well, one of the things, yes, and one of the problems is transparency. We have to go through about 15 to 20 individuals to figure out all the projects that are going on. But even after that, I'm still very shocked with the amount that's being done. And
so you regard it as little relative to the problem that exists in this environment immediately around Hopkins?
I would say
in the city.
Little, but also I don't have the feeling that we're having these types of discussions enough. I don't hear people impassioned to say we're connected to these individuals that are just 1 block away from us.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's true of the political class, too. It's true of the political class, too. They are not going to raise this problem because they just don't think there's a lot to be gained from it. But, I can give you the market argument that we're spending too much money on the cost of this. Just reverberate the costs. You could just keep adding the cost of what we're talking about here. I don't know how to put a price tag on it. I know what it costs to house the inmates in Maryland for a year. But what does it cost in terms of increased homeowners insurance, car owners insurance, automobile owners insurance because of break-ins, or for stores to hire security guards to work against the shoplifting that goes on among people who are addicted to drugs, lost wages, all that stuff. You could, by volume, it adds up. So, what I would suggest to you is to look at Hopkins Institution carefully and see, what are you doing? What are you doing in terms of community outreach? What is this institution's commitment to that? And maybe that, that'd be a great project for somebody to say, what is it? How do you, not you necessarily, but, quantify it and say, is it enough in terms of the problem? The doctors in Baltimore and Maryland are not involved in the addictions much, This is not something they in their practice they want to be dealing with very much. Huh? You have asked that question?
And we got an answer that they're spending $10 to $12 million a year in the community of East Baltimore.
On addictions?
No.
In outreach?
Social programs.
Why doesn't Bayview, the treatment center at Bayview, have more slots available? Not really. What's Bayview's budget, and why isn't it? Why aren't there more treatment slots available? Why is there a waiting list in Baltimore at all? Bloomberg, the mayor of New York, he touts treatment on demand. Make a phone call with 24 hours, we'll take care of it. I don't know if the result is that just yet, but that's been one of his things that he believes in, one of his priorities. We don't have that in Baltimore City.
Mr. Roderick, my name is Glenn Ross. I'm a community consultant with the SOURCE program, but I'm also a community consultant and advocate here in East Baltimore. What you have just done is give us an opportunity to now have a dialogue, not only around drug dealers, but also the drug and the drug culture. Yeah. My personal feeling is that this whole country, this state, this city is run on drug money. It's run on the prison system, and it runs on poor neighborhoods.
It's big. Prison system is big. Yeah.
And I've been a self-defense training officer for the prison system for 10 years. There's so much drugs in the prison that we would do drug buses, and it would really surprise you how much drugs we get out of the prison system. But if you follow it, it's all connected. I think you're giving us an opportunity to break that disconnect.
Thank you. I think it is connected to a lot of the other problems we talk about in Baltimore. Neighborhoods falling apart, neglected children, right? I mean, it's all, if you look carefully enough, not even that carefully, you will find drugs in there somewhere.
But you see, when people always talk about the drug problem and the drug deals, they don't talk about the drug culture.
Right.
And in every lifestyle, you have the good, the bad, the ugly. And when you're dealing with poor neighborhoods and people don't have the money or the resources that they need, people have a tendency of doing whatever necessary to make sure that there's shelter for their families, there's food, there's clothing. When I talk about the drug culture, I mean, you have to look at a single parent that's raising children that don't have any money. But if they're in a drug-infested neighborhood and the drug boys come in and say, hey, look, I'll give you $200, $300 if I can use your basement or room. You know, do you think they're going to take it? Do that make them a good person or a bad person? It's the drug culture.
Right.
You can look at senior citizens that's on a fixed income, the same with them, who spend maybe $25 for a box of 500 syringes. But if they can sell those syringes for $2 and $3, come on, they're going to do it. So it's not only the drug dealer, it's the drug culture. I just want to end this with saying that on May the 14th, a group called Camp Baltimore and some of the students here are participating. We're doing another 3-month exhibit at the Contemporary Arts Museum. And it's, I'm famous for saying that poor neighborhoods are created. So the theme for this is Headquarters, investigating the creation of ghettos and the prison industrial complex to show the disconnect. But people need to look at the whole picture of, about this and not just deal with just the drug problem, but the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Right there. She's heading to you with the microphone.
Sorry, I'm going
The winner this time. Dan, thanks. I think sometimes you've taken a lot of initiative here and must have taken a lot of courage. And I think sometimes we fail to take initiative because we're worried about failing to carry through on what we set out
that's true.
to be. And I wonder if you worried about failing before you put your phone number in the newspaper, and how you dealt with it, if you did.
I didn't really launch a campaign. I needed to write a column on Wednesday, June 8th. I really wanted to try something different. I did, if there were no phone calls, what would have been the result? I would have been even more dejected and depressed, and I would have gone back to writing about pepperoni probably, right? No, I didn't worry about it. I figured people were going to make fun of it or something, and on talk radio that day and the next day and the next day they did. But that was the end of it. As soon as the phone started, bless you, at 4:30 a.m. the phone started ringing, and then there was 20 calls the first day, 30 the next day. One guy telling me that I was practicing kumbaya journalism and what's the matter with me, and are my favorite. Some guy on the radio said that my favorite movies were Beaches and Under the Tuscan Sun. Stuff like that, like making fun of my masculinity, basically, because I was reaching out to drug dealers. And well, I get the last laugh on that because it's but I don't worry about. I actually worry about what people think that much, to tell you the truth. That's a great load off my back. I stopped worrying about that, like last week sometime, and I feel much better now. No, honest to God, I get like angry emails from people, and I say, go suck an egg, and I write back to them. I tell them they're probably correct what they think about me, fine. I don't worry about it. I don't worry about it. The reward for me has been this conversation I've had with these guys, men and women, this past year. It's just been fantastic for me personally. Somebody else have a question? They're sharing the mic up there. All right.
My name is Jahan Jones. I'm a member of the Youth Opportunity Center, and I had a question about. Well, it's not really a question. It's more like a statement. Okay. I feel like that people start selling drugs kind of at an early age or whatever, and it starts more when they're in high school or whatever, that they parents and their household or whatever can't support them, so they feel as though they got to go out and support themselves or whatever. So I'm kind of nervous, talking around.
Yeah, that's all right. You're doing great.
Yeah, but
what's the answer to that? How do you stop that? How do you stop kids from doing that?
It all starts at the home front or whatever, because if your parents can't provide for you, 9 times out of 10 you're going to try to go out and provide for yourself. So, and if you're young and you're a teenager, the best way you can do that, you know, in our society is to go out and sell drugs.
Yeah.
Well, or on my block or whatever, in my neighborhood. So I figured if our household, our living arrangements was better, then that'll help out a lot too.
Right. Every person, almost, well, I shouldn't make a generality. I'd say almost every man I've talked to who's survived this, who's now 28 to 35 years old or 40 years old, and survived drug dealing, didn't, you know, got shot but wasn't killed, went through prison, came out. I asked them about this, and they all got started pretty young. They all got started holding drugs for guys, holding cash for guys, even holding guns for older guys in their neighborhood when they were 14 or 15 years old. And one was 12 years old when he was doing this. You know, I don't know what we do about that, because it does go back to what you were saying, with the environment that they're in, what the opportunities they see, who's held up as a hero or a role model. These sound like cliches, but they're still they're just very true in these very poor neighborhoods where people from the suburbs and the city come to buy drugs. And I don't know how we crack that nut yet, except to get more adults out of this game. So if the adults aren't out there setting this example, maybe the kids figure, you know, maybe we don't follow it anymore. So, yes.
Oh,
somebody.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Where'd that mic go? I thought. I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. First thing is sort of following on to Jay's comment. I think part of the nature regarding transparency of activities and allocation and whatnot by the institution has to do with, I mean, just the nature of the institution being a private institution versus a public institution. I mean, were this, for example, University of Michigan, it would be much more easy to find out where the allocations go and what is actually going on. And that it's not confined to just this issue. But my question was sort of, what is Hopkins' policies regarding hiring of nonviolent ex-drug offenders?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them. I know, you know, you'd have to ask someone in human resources about what their policy is. I know that some of the people I've talked to, there's mixed information. And it depends on what year you're talking about. Pre-2001, I believe they did more hiring. I believe Hopkins did more hiring of people with felony convictions. Post-2001, I think it got tougher, based on the people I've talked to who've worked in custodial, janitorial, housekeeping kind of jobs here. But you'd have to ask somebody what the policy is. A number of people ask me what the Baltimore Sun's policy is. And because they thought I was being a hypocrite if advocating businesses to do this, if the Sun itself wasn't taking part in it. And it turns out that the Sun does consider hiring ex-felons. They don't make a fuss about it. They have hired ex-felons. They don't tell you who they are. They're one of those companies that don't make it known publicly. They don't make it known to their employees, but they do it. They actually had at one point some outreach to the Maryland Penitentiary Transition Center to bring in, to actually hire some people directly out of there to hawk the newspaper on the street and help with the stuffing supplements when they used to do it that way. And the Baltimore Sun has been cited by a couple of these organizations that I mentioned for its efforts with offender reentry. So that's the answer for the Baltimore Sun. You ought to ask the institution about that.
All right, with that, we're actually going to wrap it up.
Yeah, we have to wrap it up? Okay. Right.
A couple of points that I'd like to share with all of you, since some questions have come up about what we can do as a school, as students, faculty, staff, administrators. Certainly you can get involved with SOURCE and get involved with many of these organizations, the Rose Street Community Center, the Men's Center, Goodwill Industries. As a matter of fact, in the School of Public Health, the Anna Bacher Society, led by Kristen George, her efforts to get us to go into the prison down the street. We've had a couple of field trips, and we're talking about what we can do to work to make a difference with that population in particular. There are a number of groups that are trying to make a difference. The Environmental Justice Partnership, the Partnership for a Healthier East Baltimore, the student group Spark, Students for a Positive Academic Partnership with the East Baltimore Community. You can get in touch with all of these different groups through the Student Outreach Resource Center. I know many of you still have questions, and we know that Dan's phone number is published. So call him. What I do want to say is thank you so much
Thanks for having
coming.
me. This is nice. It's very nice. And I got to do Bloomberg. It's great.
You got to do Bloomberg.
Thank you very much.
And the other thing that I want you all to know, the honorarium for Dan Rodricks has actually been donated to People Encouraging People, which is one of the organizations that we support and that Dan frequently mentions in his column for referrals. So thank you so much, and we will continue to have these conversations.